Sometimes when you're looking for something to watch, you do so much scrolling, looking at your options that you can't settle on anything. And sometimes you spend so much time researching for a film, developing entirely new filmmaking technologies and lenses for it, that time passes you by and you end up not being able to make the film. And that is the story of Kubrick's Napoleon. Kubrick, everyone knows, was a perfectionist. Even when he didn't know what he was looking for, he would keep getting take after take after take after take until he saw the perfect thing, what he wanted. You could argue that he was indecisive, but that was really part of his genius. This became more profound as he went on in his career. You know, the gaps between his films start to become bigger and bigger and bigger because he was obsessed with finding the perfect project. He would read thousands of scripts in between his films, looking for the right project, looking for the spark of inspiration, reading countless novels and then buying the rights to adapt them and ending up never making them anyway because he just wouldn't go into something until he was totally sure and he wanted to know it inside out. One of the films that was victim of this was Napoleon, supposedly the greatest film never made. It was actually the original inspiration for this whole format. You told me that Ridley Scott read the screenplay years later and said it was underwhelming. He thought it would make for a boring film. And I read the screenplay myself years ago when I was a kid, when I was getting into Kubrick the first time. And to be honest, I can see where he's coming from. As a normal conventional script, yeah, it's odd. As a Kubrick script, you can see what it was going to be. People say his films aren't very emotional, they're quite cold. I think it's the fact that he's fascinated by people, he's fascinated by man and man's struggle, but he has a detached style. It really feels like you're not immersed in his films, you're a spectator viewing these things happening. You feel like you're the camera. To be honest, reading the script, it made me even more devastated that this film never got made because it would have been incredible. You see Napoleon's whole life told through these moments and scenes that are very odd but deliberate. You know, there's one early on scene where Napoleon's a young officer and he's been sent into town to arrest some nobleman, and the guy's basically trying to use his aura of authority to scare Napoleon. Young man, you don't know who you're dealing with, you'll get in trouble, go away with these silly orders. And Napoleon pulls out his gun and shoots the man in the head. And isolated, it's like, why is that scene in there? But you can see it's to show the evolution of Napoleon. He has a single vision and he is on a path to conquering the known world in every possible way.
Can I ask about the shooting in the head scene? Did that actually happen in real life?
Well, judging by how insane the research was for this film, I'd say it had to have happened.
After the release of 2001, he was the biggest draw in film, he was the biggest director, huge hit. He approached MGM and said, I want to make a Napoleon film, and MGM agreed to it. They were like, okay, whatever you want to do, Stanley, you go ahead and do. We talked about how meticulous he is. He done 2 years of research to make this film, and apparently he watched every single Napoleon film ever made at that time in order to get a sense of what's been done before and how I want to do it.
Isn't that a funny thought though? Because when you're watching films, I do go through spurts where I'm like, oh, I'm really into 80s comedy horrors or 50 noir. But imagine watching in a row, not just set in the same genre or time period, but about the same story over and over. Like there must have been hundreds of Napoleon films at that point.
I would personally give up, like,
yeah.
But then I don't have the mind of one of the most visionary directors of all time, you know. And we talk about historical accuracy. Kubrick originally wanted the film to be 100% historically accurate. He wanted to film in the locations where said battles actually took place, but it turns out that budget wouldn't stretch like that, so he had to go to like far off countries and find similar period places to film that would look realistic. And funnily enough, he settled on Yugoslavia as being the filming location because he wanted to use 50,000 extras in total for the film, huge battle scenes. And he went to the Yugoslavian government and was like, I want to make a film here. And they were like, mate, Mr. Kubrick making a film here, this will be a revelation for this country. And he asked them to use 1,000 of their army soldiers and to pay them $2 a day to be extras, which they readily agreed to.
That's mad as well, because you've got to look at it from their perspective as well, where the scale of the film could have built the infrastructure for a film industry forever, where they could market themselves as, we have the studio space, we have the people who have been hired and trained to make this film, we can do it, we'll be cheap as fuck. Hollywood, come and make your films here. And that could have completely created an industry with one single film. But also what you said about wanting to hire 50,000 extras, no doubt that would have probably still have the record for the most extras ever used in a film. I mean, if it was done once, maybe it would become influential and other films would have topped it, but they went obviously a different way for creating with modern effects. These scenes where you have enormous armies marching, generally you know how they're going to do it. It's going to be the standard about 100 extras in the foreground who are real, real, and then it becomes CGI as it goes in, and it kind of blends in, usually pretty seamlessly when done well. Nothing wrong with doing that effect, but the thought of actually having 50,000 extras, you know, an army, and Kubrick is this military leader, basically like Napoleon, ordering them about. Now, Spartacus, probably Kubrick's oddest film in his catalogue. It sits apart as the only true real Hollywood picture, even though he had his own mark stamped all over it. That is actually kind of similar to this, because those battle scenes, which I think are some of the best battle scenes ever filmed from that era, he employed a less ambitious version of what he planned for Napoleon. He had 10,000 maybe even less than that, but he built a giant platform that he would stand on. He could speak into a tannoy system, which would have speakers set up hidden from the camera's view all throughout, and the imagery of seeing this many people move, you know, the camera's so far back when it's the big wide shots that it could be ants or a cartoon moving about, like you can't really see them, but there's something about that uncanny valley with CGI or effects where you're not even sure why, but you can see that looks not real or looks odd. You can't mistake how amazing it looks to actually see that many men really moving for this film. It gives this reality to the scene that is just, you can't fake. So the idea of him doing that with 50,000 troops, using more modern warfare tactics with cannons and 5,000 cavalry as trained horsemen running into battle as well, and not only completely blown away any kind of battle scenes that had been filmed before it, but it might have changed the entire approach the industry had to filming these sort of battle scenes. Imagine if it was the norm of, rather than being like, let's earmark 20 million for visual CGI effects, let's go to a country where the labor's cheaper and hire literally that many extras. It just sounds incredible.
So the casting might surprise you who he wanted as Napoleon, because it's kind of a left field and they only worked together on one film. So it's not like Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Anderson and De Niro and Scorsese. It wasn't like one of those. He wanted Jack Nicholson.
I'll be honest, I'm not surprised because I knew it already, but I was surprised when I first read that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking of it as, if it happened, like, would it work? And I'm leaning towards, I think it would have been quite good.
It would have been fucking
awesome. It would
awesome.
have been so quality.
Obviously, whenever you hear about Kubrick's great unmade Napoleon film, one of the things that always gets talked about is the amount of research and how much he was going for historical accuracy. He researched exactly what Napoleon's diet was and how his diet changed throughout his life, so what he was eating was exactly what he would have been eating in that part of his life, and what time of day when he liked certain things and how he liked his food presented, and making people research and learn what the cooking methods of the time was so that it was actually prepared in that way. And that's just a diet, you know, figuring out exactly what the uniforms would have been like and exactly what soldiers would have been like, and crazy level of detail. And then having Napoleon turn up sounding like Jack Nicholson, because I've never seen Jack Nicholson do an accent. I might be wrong, but I can't remember him ever doing an accent other than the Jack Nicholson voice.
You're right, actually.
I don't know, I struggled to see him speaking French and with a French accent for this film. Now, let's be real, he wouldn't have been speaking French, because as much as Kubrick was a genius and just come off the back of 2001: A Space Odyssey, like you said, which cost a fortune, the studio execs saw it and one famously said, that's the end of Stanley Kubrick, but to their confusion went on to make an absolute fortune that summer. So they must have been looking at him like, we don't even understand what this guy's doing, but he obviously is a fucking genius. He's making shitloads of money with these weird films, so you can do whatever you want. But I'd guarantee they'd still draw the line at making this big budget film for a mostly American audience where he's speaking French the whole time. Maybe Kubrick just said, fuck it, fuck the accent. It's hard for me to picture, but if I accept that, okay, it was just going to be Jack Nicholson doing his Jack Nicholson thing. Napoleon's known for this great ego and eccentric ways. Jack Nicholson, put him into that film. It'd just be amazing. I mean, he might not have cast him in The Shining, because he might not have want to work with him again as a leading man, because, you know, he never really did that. He had his background cast that he'd recycle through his films, but he never really used leading men time and time again. So he might have been denied The Shining, but it's just like mouthwatering thinking about what he would have been like in that role.
I don't know, would I want to sacrifice The Shining though?
It's the mystery box, because you might get an even better film, but it's like, it's the fucking Shining.
We talked about realism and historical accuracy. You have to bear in mind that the height of Napoleon has to be taken into account. You can't cast someone ridiculously tall, because really, in real life, Napoleon was only 5'6", so that knocks out probably a lot of people that could have been cast.
Well, to be fair, I mean, famously, the Wolverine character is meant to be about 5 foot, and Hugh Jackman is like 6'3" in real life. Elijah Wood wasn't really 3 foot to play the Hobbit, so they could have figured ways around it. It is odd though, because it makes you think, even nowadays, we're so civilized, a scrawny dork who would have been cannon fodder and just like the local bitch back in the 1800s, or even just 100 years ago, nowadays nowadays could end up being one of the most powerful people on earth because he starts Google or YouTube. Do you know what I mean? But even nowadays, they say that there's always research that comes out that supposedly people above a certain height are more likely to get promotions or more likely to be well remembered. And you extrapolate to how archaic views must have been back in Napoleon's time. And it's just amazing that people were ready to go to war behind this little midget, this little 5'6" fella. I mean, no offense, because I know he's technically an inch taller than me. But, you know, I love you, but I probably wouldn't follow you into battle either. So
yeah, no.
it was more of a testament to what an amazing mind and impressive, charismatic guy he must have been.
If we look at the big actors during that time period, loads of names spring to mind, but my personal choice, just simply because of the charisma, Marlon Brando as Napoleon.
Yeah, that would have been sick. He wouldn't have necessarily had to have done a complete French accent. He could have found a middle ground where, you know, he's not just speaking like an American dressed up in a French outfit, but it sells you enough to be believable that, like, okay, he's Napoleon. But also his charisma and his fucking arrogance and bombastic personality and aura that would come off him. I mean, Jack Nicholson's got that aura, but Marlon Brando probably even outshines him, so he could have been amazing. Jack Nicholson maybe has more of a plotting, calculating kind of vibe to him that could possibly have sold it better, whereas Marlon Brando's a bit mad. But then again, we're talking about acting, you know, they're not bringing just their personalities to the role. But Brando would have been amazing.
Imagine Brando and how he stole the show in Apocalypse Now. He's only in it for a few scenes, but he's mesmeric. Imagine that translated to Napoleon.
Couldn't turn up that fat though.
No, he couldn't. No, you're right. And your choice?
Do you know what? At first, I think there's loads of great actors from that period, like Peter O'Toole or Gregory Peck or whoever. But the more I think about it, they have that competent confidence, but all of them kind of lack that maverick personality trait, that outrageous arrogance that Jack Nicholson or, like you said, Marlon Brando can bring to it. So the more I think about it, the more Jack Nicholson does really actually make a lot of sense. I've been won over. So we're never going to get to see the film, obviously. And there's a ton of stuff archived and some of it's leaked onto the internet of the storyboards and designs. You get an idea of maybe what it would have looked like, but obviously it's no real comparison. And as much as Kubrick was a meticulous planner, he also was a real improviser on set. So even he would know going into it that the eventual film would probably be quite different in a lot of ways. But a few years later, we do get Barry Lyndon that can basically work as a visual guide for what Napoleon would have probably looked like. And Barry Lyndon is gorgeous. Like Napoleon, he modeled a lot of the shots and filming styles on artwork of the era. He even developed special lenses that would have a much lower depth of field so that it would feel almost 2D, like a painting on a flat surface. Many of the shots that went into the film have paintings you can instantly recognize as being the direct inspiration, including how the actors are positioned in the scenes. He also developed brand new lenses that were able to film in real locations with just natural light, which was completely game-changing at the time. You know, like he'd done for 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he helped develop the technology that would ultimately become green screen technology in order to create more realistic background settings. He developed brand new technology that made filming in real locations with natural light possible in a way that was never before. So he could actually film these big, amazing outside scenes with huge armies walking around, nowhere near the 50,000 that Napoleon was supposedly going to have, but still loads of extras in these incredible scenes. So you can kind of imagine what Napoleon might have looked like, and it would have been beautiful. Like, Barry Lyndon isn't always that accessible. A lot of people don't like it, but in terms of just to look at, if you don't like the film or if you find it boring, just mute it.
Yeah.
Just look at it, because from the very opening shot, it's one of the most beautiful films ever made.
So unfortunately, Declan, shit started to hit the fan, and as I said previously, it was with MGM, but they started hitting financial trouble. And unfortunately, because Kubrick had dallied doing his 2 years of research, 3 Napoleon films were being made at the same time. So MGM basically said, we're not going to do it anymore. So Kubrick then went over to Warner Brothers and signed the 3-film deal, starting with Clockwork Orange, and the project stagnated, which is a shame. If he wasn't so OCD and so perfectionist, we could have seen this.
I mean, Kubrick was so famous at this point that even just hearing that he was planning on making a Napoleon film became big news in the industry, to the point where studios wanted to bring out their own Napoleon films just to try and soak up some of the attention that his would be getting. I don't even know if they intended to bring him out before he did, but the fact that he was researching for so long and working on the pre-production for so long ended up coming out long before his was going to even start filming. So he never even got to step one day on set, sadly. But it's interesting because Barry Lyndon, as much as it was still a period piece, same era, and he got to use a lot of the interesting technologies he was developing and research from the Napoleon film. In a lot of ways, it's nearly like a backlash to the Napoleon film. Napoleon is this man who bent the universe to his own will. He conquered entire lands, outsmarted entire countries, whereas Barry Lyndon is all about luck in every single scene. Everything that happens to Barry Lyndon throughout the film is always not because of a decision he made, but because of circumstance that's happened to him. Every single scene that happens is a direct response of the previous scene in a linear fashion. There's never a random scene where it cuts to something else happening. It's all in a straight order, and it's all because of other things happening to Barry Lyndon. It's the opposite of Napoleon. It's a man who suffers a fate and a destiny that is forced upon him by the world. And that's the reason why in the final scene, he chooses to lose the duel just so he can actually decide his own fate, even if it's going to be a bad one. Now, it's not a Barry Lyndon review, so sorry for detouring off that. Right. But I think it was worth mentioning just for the fact that it's so interesting that the period piece he did end up making was essentially the inverse of the film he was hoping to make.
Doing this episode has kind of made me sad.
If you want to be sad, read the script. That will really make you sad.
But there's good news. Steven Spielberg publicly said that he's got the script and he's currently working on a 7-part limited mini-series with the blessing of his estate. We don't have a time frame of it coming out, Declan, but it's exciting to have director of the magnitude of Spielberg working on this. Obviously, it won't be what we wanted. It won't be Kubrick's vision. But if we had to pick a director to try and bring a similar vision to life, I would put Steven Spielberg's name forward. So I'm excited.
In style and feel of his films, Kubrick is in some ways nearly the opposite of Spielberg, but had great respect for each other and actually a real friendly and working relationship. They would discuss ideas a lot on films like Schindler's List and later AI, which Kubrick was originally making, developing for his own purposes. Through the long pre-production process, actually decided that no, the heart of this movie, the kind of film it is, it should be Spielberg that makes it. As much as there's this idea that Spielberg just made a film Kubrick died before he could have made, and that annoyed some people, but it's actually the opposite. He'd already decided he wanted Spielberg to make that film. But that goes to show that they had a real working relationship and an understanding, and you think Spielberg, as long as he doesn't necessarily direct it himself, picks the right people that understand the tone, he could possibly capture at least a good tribute to what Kubrick's vision for the Napoleon film would have been. Maybe they'll just also do their own thing and go a different direction, and he'll make it a Spielbergian version of Napoleon. But it's exciting anyway. You know, at worst, we're getting a cool 7-part big budget miniseries produced by Spielberg. So this is inarguably kind of the quintessential original coined greatest film never made. There is the silver lining that we kind of got an idea of what it might have been like, which you don't usually get with these films that don't get made, in that he got to make Barry Lyndon, and even though in terms of themes and concept it's the absolute inverse, we still get to see the incredible visual beauty and technological accomplishments and research and love and sweat and tears that Kubrick put into developing his failed Napoleon film. At least a lot of that hard work still got to eventually translate to something on film. Barry Lyndon, a lot of people don't like it. I personally love it. I do think it's, even as Kubrick films go, one of his least accessible, and you've got to give it a couple of watches and kind of get into the vibe of it. It's a definitely in the mood for a film, but still, it's an incredible film and just another kick in the balls of thinking like, wow, how much better could Napoleon been if it ever got made?